The tea was not the mistake. The mistake was being noticed at all. Mira Veyne had spent 3 years in Dravenmoor Palace, learning the specific discipline of invisibility, how to move through a room without becoming the thing the room's attention landed on, how to carry a tray, fold a cloth, arrange a table in a way that produced no friction, no reaction, no moment of recognition. She was good at it. She was, by any objective measure, the most efficient maid in the West Wing. She finished tasks without being asked twice. She anticipated what was needed before the need was stated. She had a memory for details. What a noble took in their tea, which visiting dignitary disliked flowers in the east-facing rooms. That should have made her valuable. But she was an Omega, without a pack, without a family name, without the kind of history that made her presence in a palace feel earned rather than tolerated. And some people did not like things they could not categorize. The mistake was the way Mira carried herself in the Great Hall, the way she moved, quietly, efficiently, with the specific downward angle of someone who had learned that the safest body language in a palace was one that apologized for taking up space. That should have been invisible. That should have been exactly what a maid was supposed to be. But the tray tilted when the senior servant entered behind her, pressed a deliberate shoulder into her path, and the cup went over, and the hot tea spread across the marble floor, and that was all Lady Seraphine needed. The Luna of Dravenmoor crossed the hall in 5 measured steps and struck Mira across the face. The sound was very clear in the high-ceilinged room. Every noble in attendance looked at the floor. Seraphine said, "An Omega maid should know where her eyes belong." On the floor, Mira knelt and began collecting the broken pieces of the cup. Her hands were steady. She kept her face angled down, but her fingers tightened around a shard of porcelain, and she did not let go of it. She had not broken yet. The howling began before Seraphine could say anything further. It came from the East Tower, as it always came from the East Tower, that high, ragged, spiraling sound that was too much grief for small bodies to hold. The twin pups of Alpha King Kael Draven had been making that sound in varying degrees of intensity for 3 years. Tonight, it was the worst it had ever been. A healer came down the corridor at speed, holding a hand to her forearm where something had bitten through the bandage. Another healer passed her, going the opposite direction, his kit abandoned on the floor. "They're not recognizing anyone," someone said. "Their eyes have gone full shift." Seraphine stood very still. She arranged her expression into the shape of a mother in anguish. But Mira, who had been watching powerful people manage their faces for the 3 years she had worked in this palace, noticed what a mother in anguish actually looked like: the involuntary forward lean, the hands that moved toward the sound before the mind caught up, and Seraphine had none of it. Kael came through the far doors. He was controlled, the way he was always controlled, the way that control sat on him like armor he had never figured out how to remove. But his eyes were the eyes of a man watching his children drown, in something he could not reach into and pull them out of. He said, "Fetch every healer in the palace." 2 had already run. The others were being gathered. Mira was still on the floor, still picking up the shards. She heard the howling again, and something in her chest opened like a wound. She did not know why she knew that one of them was afraid of metal sounds. She did not know why she knew that the other one hated shadows crossing the ceiling. The specific panic of something moving across the light overhead. She only knew that she knew these things. With the same certainty she knew her own breathing. She stood up. The servant beside her grabbed her elbow. "Do you want to die?" Mira said, "No. But they are afraid." She walked toward the East Tower stairs. The room was dark, except for the blood moon light that came through the high window. The furniture had been worked over. A chair in fragments, the curtain in 2 pieces on the floor, the double crib pushed against the wall with the magical seasons on its frame, flickering and partially broken. Rowan and Rhea were in the far corner, small and coiled and terrible, their eyes the amber gold of wolves mid-shift, their small hands flexed with the beginning of claws. A healer's abandoned kit was tipped on its side near the door. Mira did not rush in. She sat down on the floor in the doorway. She made herself as small as she could, shoulders low, no sudden movement, the universal body language of something that was not a threat, not a pursuer, not a hand coming toward them before they were ready. She waited. Neither child moved. She said softly, I know. You were somewhere bad and no one came. She reached into the sound she had been carrying for 3 years without knowing what it was, the melody that surfaced in her sleep and in the quiet between tasks, and in the moments when she heard these children from across the palace and felt something in her chest ring like a struck bell. She sang. The room seemed to draw one sharp breath. She did not know what dreambane was yet. She did not know that the particular exhaustion the twins wore, the way they fought rest, even when they were clearly desperate for it, the way their own instincts seemed to hurt them, was the result of deliberate poisoning by something that had been placed where they breathed when they slept. She knew none of that. She only knew that whatever had been making the room feel like the inside of a clenched fist was loosening. The dreambane that had been woven into the crib, the pillow, the very walls of this room shuddered. It did not disappear, but it contracted, the way a fist unclenches when the thing it was holding is no longer the right shape to hold. The amber faded from Rowan's eyes. He watched her. She kept singing. Rhea made a sound that was not a growl anymore. It was something earlier than a growl, something that had been covered over by the growl but was still underneath it, the sound of a small child who had been very frightened for a very long time and was not sure yet if this was safe. Mira did not move toward them. She let the melody carry whatever she was into the room, whatever it was about her scent, her voice, her specific presence that the dreambane had been trying so hard to bury. Rowan crawled to the edge of the curtain and pressed his forehead against her knee. Rhea, a moment later, took her hand. The howling stopped. The silence that followed was the most complete Mira had ever been inside. And then, from Rhea, barely above a whisper, "Mother," a pause. Then Rowan, his face pressed into the fabric at her knee. "Mother." Mira did not move. She could not move. She sat in the doorway of the East Tower room, with a royal twin on each side of her, and the word moving through her like light, through a crack in something that had been sealed for years. She had not planned this. She did not know what it meant. But her hands, without any instruction from her mind, came up and held them. Kael stood in the corridor outside the doorway. He had not entered. He had arrived when the howling stopped, had looked through the door at Mira, sitting on the floor with his children settled against her, and had not moved since. Seraphine arrived behind him. She looked at the scene for a moment. A mother would have moved immediately. A mother would not have been able to stop herself from moving. The specific gravity of a child in distress pulls toward the person bonded to them without requiring a decision. Seraphine stood very still and assessed. Mira watched her do it. Seraphine was performing the calculation of what the scene meant, and what the optimal response to the scene was, and what moving too quickly might cost her if the children rejected her again in front of witnesses. She was thinking like a politician, not a mother. And then she moved, not because she had decided it would look appropriate, but because she understood that the longer she waited, the more visible her hesitation became. She walked past Kael and into the room and reached for Rhea. Rhea screamed, not the frightened scream of a cursed child, but the specific, indignant, utterly clear scream of a small person whose known safety was being interrupted. She pulled back against Mira. Rowan did the same, his small hand fisting in Mira's sleeve. Seraphine's face shifted. Something under the composed surface moved quickly, she said. She has used Omega witchcraft on them. She has made them dependent on her through some kind of. Kael said, "Be quiet." He said it very quietly. Seraphine stopped. Kael looked at his children, at the way they were positioned, at the ease of it. He said, "No one touches them. No one touches her." He said it to the room, to the guards at the door, to the 3 remaining healers who had come up the stairs. Seraphine looked at him. He did not look back at her. The next morning, Kael brought Mira to the audience chamber and asked her where she had learned the song. Mira told him the truth. She did not know. She said she had been unable to remember anything before 3 years ago. She had fragments, a red-lit room, the sound of an infant crying, a sensation of someone pulling something away from her, but nothing continuous, nothing named. She said, "I don't know what it means that I knew the song. I don't know what it means that they recognized me. I only know that they did." Seraphine, who was present, said, "The memories of an Omega Maid are not reliable testimony." Mira looked up. She said, "If my memories are not reliable, why do your children rely on me?" Seraphine did not answer. Kael did not look away from Mira. Later that same day, healer Mira examined Rowan while Mira was holding him. When she placed her hand on the boy's wrist to check a rash, the mark there, a small silver pale crescent that the palace had always treated as a birth irregularity, began to glow. Not faintly, clearly. Mira said nothing to the room, but she called Kael aside and told him what she believed she had seen. And when Seraphine placed her hand over Rhea's mark an hour later, claiming she had noticed it had been glowing, the light went out immediately. Elder Varric had the incident report sealed before it could be circulated. Kael went to Mira that evening. Not the palace healers, not the court physicians. He found Mira through a contact Varric did not know he had. In the city below the palace, in the small house she had kept since being dismissed from court 3 years ago, following an unnamed dispute. She had been waiting for someone to find her. She examined the twins' room first. The pillowcases, the mattress, the crib frame, the toys. She showed Kael what she found in the surface of the fabric. Dreambane residue, distributed deliberately, concentrated where the twins' heads rested when they slept, she said. Dreambane did not erase love. It taught the mind to flinch from it. She said the twins had not been cursed in the way the palace described. They had been poisoned with something that made their memories of their mother physically painful, which was why they cried and fought and refused contact. Every instinct that should have drawn them toward comfort had been turned into a source of fear, she said. When Mira entered the room, when she sang, the Dreambane didn't recognize her as a threat because her scent was suppressed. It let her past. And when the children responded to something that Dreambane had been making them hurt to remember, the Dreambane started to crack. Kael said, "The pups calling her mother. Is that proof enough?" Mira said, "The pups were not proof by themselves, but every record that should have contradicted them had been altered by the same hand. Proof is in the pattern," Kael said. "What is the lullaby she sang?" Mira was quiet for a moment. She said, "It is the royal mother's lullaby. It is not written in any public record. It passes from mother to child directly. A servant cannot learn it. A political appointee cannot learn it. Seraphine does not know it. I have heard her attempt it twice since the twins were born, and they cried both times." She let that settle. Then she led him to what she had kept for 3 years in a cloth, in the lining of her traveling bag, a fragment of linen, dark with an old stain. She said, "I was in the birth room the night of the blood moon. I was dismissed before dawn and told to remember nothing. But I was a healer before I was a court servant, and I do not discard evidence." She brought out the sealed birth register she had reconstructed from the fragments she'd copied before the originals were sealed. She laid out the night Kael could not fully remember, the memory seal placed on him in the hours after the birth, the dismissal of everyone who had been present, the substitution of Seraphine in every official record, and the name that had been crossed off and replaced. Mira Veyne. Kael was very still. He said, "I remember something from that night, something no one else would know." He said, "The boy grabbed her hair the moment he was placed in her arms." She laughed. She named him Rowan because of it, because he held on. He said, "The girl didn't stop crying until she sang. The girl was named Rhea because of the melody." Mira said, "Yes," he said. Seraphine gave me different names for why they were named. She said she had chosen the names from old Blood Moon texts. Mira said, "Yes, she did." He understood what he was understanding. He had spent 3 years as a father who could not reach his own children. 3 years of watching them cry, and fight, and refuse everyone who came to them. 3 years of being told that the problem was a curse, a bloodline irregularity, a maternal rejection phenomenon that the healers were still working to understand. He had accepted those explanations. He had accepted them because they were given to him by people in authority, because he had no alternative framework, because every time he tried to investigate further, his children's nights got worse, and he blamed himself for the investigation. The system had been designed to use his love against him. He had let it. He also understood the question of why it had taken him 3 years to ask the right things. Mira said, "Every time you questioned the birth record, the children had worse nightmares in the morning. Varric understood your love for your children. He used it. He made you afraid to look," she said. "Every time you questioned the birth record, the children's nightmares worsened by morning. So the council taught him to fear the truth before he could reach it." That night, Kael opened the sealed birth chamber in the east wing. Mira was there when he did it. She walked into the room and stopped walking. The memories did not come back neatly or chronologically. They came back the way a wave came back after being blocked, compressed and fast, and then suddenly everywhere. The stone wall where she had rested her back, the window that had been open, Kael's hand, the weight and the specific indescribable reality of holding a newborn for the first time, and then twice, the name she had chosen, the lullaby she had sung, Seraphine in the doorway with Varric, and Varric's voice saying quietly and without emotion, she must not remember. She came back to herself on the floor of the birth chamber, with Kael kneeling beside her and Mira's hand on her shoulder. She said their names, quietly to herself. Rowan, because the boy had grabbed her hair and held it, like he did not intend to let go of anything he found worth holding. Rhea, because the girl had not stopped crying until the melody Mira had been carrying for 3 years, without knowing where she had learned it, had moved through the room and settled around them, both like something falling into place. She had not named them from a book. She had not named them from a tradition. She had named them from the specific, unrepeatable reality of being the person who was holding them when they were new. She said, "I know their names. I know why I named them," she said. "Someone took 3 years from me." Kael said nothing. There was nothing adequate to say, and he appeared to understand that. Seraphine moved the next morning. She had been watching the sealed chamber with the same attention she gave to everything that threatened her position. She told Varric what had happened. Varric arranged the rest. Dreambane was planted in Mira's room before breakfast. By midday, Elder Varric stood before the council with a healer's report stating that an Omega Maid had been found in possession of the same substance that was poisoning the royal heirs. Varric had not hidden Mira 3 years ago because she was weak. He had hidden her because the crown would have obeyed her before it obeyed him. He was doing it again now, for the same reason. If Mira stood before the council as a proven mother rather than an accused maid, the foundation of everything he had built, the Luna appointment, the memory seals, the sealed birth room, 3 years of managed succession, would collapse. He needed her to look like a criminal before she could look like a mother. Mira was brought before the council. Rowan and Rhea were in the corridor. They had not been kept from the hearing. Seraphine had brought them as evidence of Mira's influence, intending to show the council how unnaturally bonded they were to the maid. Instead, when Mira was brought in restraints, both pups began crying, not the wild, frightened crying of dreambane, the clear, known crying of children who understood that something was being done to someone they loved. Varric had the twins removed. Then he read the formal charge. A guard came to Mira after, offered her a route out, through the kitchen corridor, through the gate into the city. Mira had arranged it. She had a horse. She had money. She could be outside the palace walls in 20 minutes. Mira stood at the kitchen door. She heard, from somewhere above her in the tower, the sound of Rhea crying. She had heard that sound for 3 years, without knowing why it pulled at her like a current. Now she knew. She turned around. She did not go back for Kael. She went back for her children. If they asked her later, and she knew they would ask, the council would ask, the healers would ask, Kael would ask, she had her answer ready, not because a king remembered her, not because a council permitted it, because she had carried them, named them, lost them, and come back for them. That was what a mother was. The blood moon ritual was held in the East Tower room. Seraphine stood before the double crib in her Luna formal wear. The silver crown, the floor-length ceremony mantle, the composed face of a woman performing a role she had been preparing for since childhood. Varric read the opening of the blood moon claim ritual. The words were old and legal, and would, when completed, transfer the blood recognition bond from its natural holder to the named claimant. It required the twins to be present and unable to contest. Rowan and Rhea were in the ritual circle. They were not calm. Kael and Mira were being held outside by council guard. Kael was not detained by physical force alone. 2 council members had stationed themselves with documentation authorizing the ritual, and breaking through them would render the proceedings legally contested in ways that Varric had designed to be irresolvable. Mira came through the servants' passage. She had not told anyone she was coming. She stood at the edge of the ritual circle. Myra's voice came from behind the door. The circle can erase the memory you have left. If you enter what you just recovered, Myra said, if memory is the price, then at least this time I'll lose it after I've saved them. She stepped into the circle. She sat down between Rowan and Rhea, and she placed her hands on the floor near them, close but not demanding, not requiring them to come to her. She sang. The dreambane in the circle didn't know what to do with her. Her scent was familiar in a way it had never been taught to block. Her song was the same song that had cracked it before. The circle flickered. Varric raised his voice to complete the ritual. Seraphine said quickly, "A kingdom cannot be ruled by children's instincts." Mira looked at her. She said no, but it should not be ruled by stolen memories either. She turned to Rowan and Rhea. She said, "Not her, not the council, not even me. Remember with your own hearts." Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and put his hand in hers. Rhea followed. The birthmarks on their wrists blazed, the clearest, most undeniable light the room had seen. The ritual circle shattered. Varric's blood oath, bound to the ritual's completion, inverted. The records he had sealed, altered, and destroyed began to surface, not magically, but in the way all sealed things surface when the mechanism that sealed them breaks. Documentation the council had no legal path to contest. Seraphine was taken from the room by Kael's guard. Varric was taken by the tribunal that Kael had already positioned outside, the one that had been waiting for this moment since last night. Kael entered the room. He looked at Mira sitting on the floor with his children. He did not move toward her immediately. He said, in front of everyone remaining, the guards, the council members who had not been part of Varric's circle, the healers, the servants who had managed to stay present through the proceedings, in a voice that carried no ambiguity, I was told that the woman who bore my children had died. I believed it because the people I trusted told me it was true, because the records said it was true, and because every time I tried to look further, my children suffered for it, and I was taught to believe the suffering was my fault. He paused. He said, "None of that is an explanation. It is a description of how I was used. The failure is still mine. I chose to trust the system over the evidence of my own children," he said. "I let the records speak instead of listening to my own children. I let the council make me afraid to ask the questions that would have found her. I will not call it a curse. It was my failure, and I name it as mine." He said it to the room. He also said it to Mira. Mira listened. She said, "I did not come back to be your Luna. I came back for my children." Kael said, "Then I will begin by being worthy of being their father." She did not respond immediately. Rowan had fallen asleep against her. Rhea was watching Kael with the measuring gaze of a child who had decided to take her time. 3 weeks later, the East Tower room had curtains that were not torn. The crib was still double, but it was no longer pushed against the wall. The seals had been removed. The room smelled of something ordinary, wood and fabric, and the faint sweetness of the powder Mira had left for the twins' skin. Rowan and Rhea were asleep, each holding one of Mira's hands. In the great hall the following morning, the royal pups ran the length of the room, through the formal procession of the Autumn Council, pulling Mira by the hands toward the dais where Kael was seated. The nobles parted. The twins stopped at the foot of the dais. They said, together and without uncertainty, "Our mother is home." Kael did not instruct them. He did not arrange it. He had nothing to do with the moment, except to be the person sitting at the dais when it happened. He looked at Mira. She looked at her children. She looked at the hall that had once struck her and told her where her eyes belonged. Kael extended his hand. He did not speak. He did not claim. Mira looked at him for a long moment. Then she placed her hand in his. Not because a palace required it. Not because a bond demanded it. Not because she had forgiven everything, or because 3 years of grief had dissolved in a single season of reunification, or because the weight of what had been taken from her had become something she no longer felt. She would carry all of that. There was no version of this story where she did not carry it. But she was not carried by it. She had come back for her children, and her children had chosen her, and now she was in a palace that had once told her where her eyes belonged, choosing, slowly, on her own terms, what she wanted to build from the rubble of what had been taken. She placed her hand in his, not because a palace required it, not because a bond demanded it, because she chose to. The palace had once called her an Omega Maid, but under the blood moon, the children remembered the truth first, and the kingdom finally followed.